Good morning, everybody. Thank you for joining us this morning here on Parliament Hill. My name is Matthew Green, and I'm the NDP MP representing Hamilton Centre, who alongside our party's immigration critic, Jenny Kwan, will be hosting this morning's press conference. We are joined today representing our party, Laurie Idlout, MP Lindsay Matheson, and MP Blake Desjardins. The purpose of our press conference is to call for the Liberal government to immediately enact special immigration measures to facilitate the evacuation of extended family members of Canadians and permanent residents in Gaza as the humanitarian crisis worsens there. And as the temporary ceasefire has already come to an end and the military operations and bombing resumes, we also renew our NDP's demand to the Prime Minister, Justin Trudeau, to call for an immediate and permanent ceasefire in Israel and Palestine to save lives. Joining us this morning are two members of the Palestinian-Canadian community, Rani Hemaid and Israel-Alsaafin, and also representatives of hundreds of families across the country waiting by the phone to hear that their family members are safely being evacuated from the region. Also here with us today in their ongoing support are members of the Coalition of Canadian Palestinian Organizations and the Association of Palestinian Arab Canadians, and the National Council of Canadian Muslims, who will also be providing remarks. To begin, I will now hand the podium over to our NDP immigration critic and Vancouver East MP, Jenny Kwan, who will be speaking on the details for the requests that we are supporting and that are coming directly from the community. Jenny?
Thank you very much, Matthew, and good morning, everyone. I am here today on behalf of the NDP calling on the Liberal government to take immediate action. As we know, the situation in Gaza is getting so desperate that literally, as we speak, people's lives are being lost. And the NDP has called for a ceasefire, and more than ever, we need the government to put in and request for a permanent ceasefire. This needs to be said from Canada. It needs to be said to the world that Canada wants to put humanitarian measures at the forefront. We know that there was a period of time whereby there was a pause with the bombardment, and now the siege and the bombardment has resumed. And even just over this past weekend, as we were watching the news that was coming in, already hundreds of people's lives have been lost, and they're primarily women and children. Our community members that we've been talking with are struggling. People are worried sick about their loved ones. They don't know minute by minute, day by day, whether or not they will survive. Now, Canada can do something about this. Canada can bring in a special immigration measure immediately to allow for Canadians and people here in Canada with loved ones to reunite. And the NDP is calling for the Liberal government, for the Prime Minister, for the Minister of Immigration, and for the Foreign Affairs Minister to do exactly that. This is something that can be done, we know. Other jurisdictions have done it. Our allied country, Australia, has a special visa program in place. I'm aware that they have brought in about 800 people under their program. We can do this here as well. At the Immigration Committee, when the Minister Mark Miller, came before us, I asked the Minister at that time if he would first ensure that those who are already here and whose permit, their visas, study permit, work permit, and the like, have expired or about to expire, if the government will automatically renew them. And he said yes. And I was very pleased to see the government actually announce that measure. I also asked the Minister if he would expedite existing applications and also ensure that extended family members would be able to be part of that application, to amend it to ensure extended family members can join their loved ones. And his response was, we will be as flexible as possible. Now, what we need the government to do is to make a clear announcement on what they're going to do, and that is to expedite existing applications to allow for extended families to be part of that application. For those who do not have extended applications, to allow for Canadians and people here in Canada, those with permanent resident status, to also bring their loved ones here to Canada. And when I talk about extended family members, under immigration, what's deemed as family is very limited. It's limited to spouse, for example, limited to children who are minors. However, if you have children who's aged out, that is 22 years or older, they're excluded. Parents, you have to win a lottery in order to bring your parents here. Grandparents, same thing. And then aunts and uncles, cousins, nephews, they're all excluded. Siblings, they're excluded. We need that change because how we define families is very different in different cultures and different communities. And right now in this situation, there is an urgent need to bring people to safety. So the New Democrats is calling for the Liberals to bring in that special immigration measure, to expand the definition of family members, to allow for extended family members to be part of that measure. I know people are going to say, oh, but what about security? How are we going to address the question of security? Well, we have done this before. In the case of Afghanistan, for example, government was able to get biometrics and security measures be processed in a third country. We could do the same here. People can be brought to safety, for example, to Egypt, and then to have all the paperwork follow so that we can go through the security measures, the biometrics, and so on. So that all could happen. And so time is of the essence. As we speak, people's lives are in jeopardy, and we need the government to take action. Finally, I will just say this. On the question around a ceasefire, just last Friday, my colleague, MP Alexandre Luis, tabled a petition in the House of Commons. The petition garnered 286,719 signatures. This is the petition that received more signatures than any other petition in the history of the House of Commons. And that petition called for an immediate ceasefire. That petition called for an end to the blockade. And that petition called for Canada to ensure that we meet our commitments to defend human rights. This is the right thing to do. Time is of the essence. I plead with the government to do what is necessary to save lives.
And through much of the reporting, it's often the case that the stories are lost. For every statistic of a family member lost, there is a story right here in Canada. That's why we believe we have a moral obligation as MPs to do the right thing and help our constituents reunite with their families through evacuation in this region. Which is why I would now like to introduce Palestinian-Canadian community members, Rani, Hemaid, and Israa Alsaafin, who will share with you their stories.
Good morning. My name is Rani Hemaid. I'm a Canadian citizen. Since I came to Canada 7 years ago, I have made Canada my home. I grew up in Gaza. I have my parents and my brother my brother's family with 5 children and my sister's family with 5 children in the Gaza Strip. Our house was bombed by the Israeli warplane on October 10th. My 62-year-old mom and my 70-year-old father and sister-in-law had to carry the 5 children when the house started falling on them and run among bombs, fires, and dead bodies on the street, running for their life. Since then, my family has fled 5 more places until this date. They have no home, nothing left. My niece, Sally, who's 6 years old, is the closest in age with my daughter, Alma. They both love princesses and become best friends even though they have never met in real life because of the siege on Gaza. A few weeks ago, I was able to call them on the phone. I spoke with Sally, with my daughter, Alma, and I told Sally, when this war ends, I will buy you a crown, you and Alma a crown. She told me, Uncle, please do not bring it here to Gaza. It will be destroyed, same as my toys and my clothes. And she repeated to me again, she said, do not bring it here. We will come to you. She repeated again to me, "We will come to you." She was afraid if I misunderstood her. I cried after the call. I felt so helpless. Could not even answer my daughter Alma's question. "Baba, why don't you bring them here to Canada? I can play with my cousins, and Sally can sleep in my room." The Canadian government has failed us and did not hold up the values of Canada as a peace-seeking and a humanitarian country that has a history of championing human rights and providing a safe harbor to those in need. It has been almost 60 days since the war started in Gaza. Until this date, Palestinian-Canadians are watching and fearing every minute that they might lose their loved one in Gaza. The Canadian government has not acted to protect its citizens, residents, and their families. Despite our continuous effort to communicate with the SOS, the Foreign Affairs and Immigration, we were always told that our extended family do not qualify, nor satisfy the Canadian rules to leave Gaza. I want to ask the Canadian government, on what ground do you define whose lives are qualified to live and whose lives are not worth of saving? When can we stop measuring human based on the color of their skins, based on where they're from, or based on who they are? We are here today calling the Canadian government to act immediately now. We, the Palestinian Canadians, deserve to feel safe, protected, and valued, and treated equally by our government. We call on the Canadian government to put in action and a motion to reunite us with our families, evacuate them from Gaza, and bring them to Canada now. Thank you.
Hello, everybody. My name is Israa Alsaafin. I have talked a lot about my story and how we lost my brother on October 13 while he was fleeing to safety with his baby and his wife. Today, I'm coming with a message from Gaza, from my sister to you. This war will end one day, but how will we erase what we saw, heard, and felt from our memories? How am I supposed to forget all the bodies and remains while looking for my brother? How am I supposed to forget the destruction of my beautiful city? We are living nights and days of nonstop bombing through air, sea, and land invasion. Our neighbors' buildings falling down and hearing the screams of people asking for help, knowing that there is no way to help them. Even the paramedics can't reach them. Families were erased completely from the civil records. Neighborhoods were completely being wiped out. What else should we talk about? Homelessness, lack of food and water, lack of fuel, no medicine or the ability to get treated in a hospital? Or should we talk about the injured one whose wounds are infected or rotten? Or the ones who are left behind to die alone? What is this world waiting for? These are the messages my sister is sending to you and to the world. Leaving Palestinians to die in the most brutal and inhumane ways will be always shameful, written in our history. Today, my sister begged me to get her out of there because I'm their only hope. Mr. Prime Minister, I'm calling for a ceasefire, and this is an overdue request. If you are not doing it for the sake of humanity, please do it for the sake of our Canadian children who are living the disappointment of this shameful history. Mr. Prime Minister, I'm not ready to lose another family member. And I'm asking on behalf of my kids to bring their grandparents and immediate family to safety. Mr. Prime Minister, I will never forgive you or forgive anyone in this world have a chance to save my family and fail to do so. Thank you.
I want to extend a deep gratitude to both Rani Hemaid and Israel-Hamas for your bravery in sharing your stories with us. Your experiences are not just personal narratives, they are powerful testimonies that shed light on the realities faced by so many Palestinian members of our community here in Canada. Lastly, I would like to invite Khalid Elgazzar here in his capacity as Vice Chair for NCCM.
Good morning, bonjour. My name is Khalid Elgazzar, and I'm the Vice Chair of the National Council of Canadian Muslims. Je m'appelle Khalid Elgazzar et je suis le vice-président du Conseil national des musulmans canadiens. Every day, our staff has been on the phone trying to assist Canadians evacuating from Gaza. Every day, we hear their stories. We hear stories of Canadians forced to make horrific choices to leave family members behind in a war zone because those family members don't have citizenship. We hear from Canadians that have returned from Gaza who can't get their family members out. Nous entendons des histoires de Canadiens contraints de faire des choix horribles, de laisser des membres de leur famille derrière eux dans une zone de guerre parce que ces membres de leur famille n'ont pas la citoyenneté. We have asked the government to try to assist to make sure Canadians can get their family members out of Gaza. While we continue to work with the government, we also want to make it very clear, as we have said publicly before, that the status quo solution is not acceptable. Nous avons demandé au gouvernement d'essayer de faire en sorte que les Canadiens puissent faire sortir les membres de leur famille. Tout en continuant à travailler avec le gouvernement, nous tenons à préciser que la solution du statu quo n'est pas acceptable. Canada needs to support Canadians and their families fleeing Gaza today. We also need to end the cause of the fleeing, namely by joining with what over 70% of Canadians have called for, which is a full ceasefire. We need to see a permanent ceasefire, and we need to see peace. Thank you. Merci.
At this point, we would just like to again acknowledge the Coalition of Palestinian Organizations and the Arab Palestinian Association of Canada for their support and participation in this press conference. Their presence amplifies the impact of our message, and I think it reinforces the solidarity of Palestinians across this country. At this time, we would like to open the conference to questions.
First of all, thank you for being here. I know what a difficult time you are all experiencing. Jenny, you spoke about to get parents out, it's like winning the lottery. We have heard of reports of people who have been able to get their extended family members out, and for the families that I've spoken to, that's made the whole experience even more frustrating of trying to, get their own parents out. Can you speak at all to what you meant by winning the lottery, and if anyone else would like to speak about their feelings on that subject, I'd appreciate hearing from them as well.
Under the Canadian immigration process, the reunification program for parents or grandparents is subject to a lottery process. Family members here make application to the Canadian government, and then it goes into a pool to see whether or not you'll be selected to be allowed to sponsor your family members here. That is the current reunification program for parents, grandparents. Now, that program, though, in the last couple of years, the government had actually even frozen the process so that no new applications could be submitted. So that is to say, if you wish to actually sponsor to bring your parents or grandparents here to Canada now, you cannot even submit an application. And for those that are existing in the pool, it's subject to a lottery. You literally have to win a lottery to be able to complete your application for that sponsorship. In the situation with Gaza at the moment, as was mentioned with the minister at the Immigration Committee, early on I asked the minister if he would ensure that those with existing applications, that they would allow for extended family members to be part of that application and to bring them to safety. The minister's response was that we will be, quote, as flexible as possible. And so I assume that the government is doing something on a one-off basis, and perhaps that's why some people manage to get to safety. But that's not good enough. It is not the right approach. What the government has to do is to make a public announcement to say that the Canadian government will expand the definition of family for reunification and to include extended family members, to put in place a proper process so that people can make that application and to be able to be brought to safety. It can't be a one-off off the side of somebody's desk for that to happen. The process is going to be frustrated, is already frustrating, and more importantly, it is dire. People's lives are in jeopardy. UNICEF, the executive director for UNICEF, Catherine Russell, actually said on the public record, at this moment in time, Gaza is the most dangerous place for children. I think we need to just take that in for a minute. I'm a mother, I have 2 kids. I got to tell you, we can do more, and Canada must do more. Australia has done it. They are doing it. Some 800 people came through to safety with that special immigration measure. So what is the justification for Canada not to do the same as our ally country? We need to do that. We just heard stories from family members, and there's so many untold family stories that are just like that. You know, imagine if you were told that your spouse who's in Gaza at the moment is allowed to come to safety, but you're not allowed to bring your parents with you. I have a constituent in that situation who's telling me that story. I can't, you know, I just can't imagine what they have to go through. And the idea to say that you're just going to leave your parents behind. We have a humanitarian crisis. This is something that the Canadian government can do. This is what the Prime Minister can do. I call on them to take action now.
Do you have a sense of the numbers of individuals in Gaza who have current applications within immigration, and and what those numbers are, as well as in terms of extending this, what estimates are?
Well, I don't have the exact numbers, but what we do know, and I've talked to many individuals from across the country. They're not just from Vancouver East, they're not just from Hamilton, they're across the country. And they've been trying to reach out to their members of parliament with no response. The Liberals are not responding to them, the Conservatives are not responding to them. This is not acceptable. This is their job to respond to their constituents. And so we need to do what we can to bring them to safety. Australia has brought in a special immigration measure. They are doing that. Why can't we?
Ask Rani or Israa, could you tell us if your families tried to cross at the Rafah border crossing, and if they did, what happened next?
Well, I can't answer because of my experience lately. They can't cross the borders. You have to have a special arrangement to have your name on that list. Either you have a foreigner passport, like a Canadian citizen that was stuck there. My family can't go there. There is some kind of rumors of paying money for the borders there. The numbers is extremely imaginary. It's like a 5,000 USD for one person to get your name on the borders to leave. So if I want to evacuate my family, I have to pay like $80,000 in order to evacuate them. And who has that number? And you're asking people in Gaza with a major poverty in there, and non-worker people, highly educated people, but with no jobs, to pay that amount of money while they left their houses destroyed with nothing on them but in shelters. How this is fair?
Ma question pour Monsieur le porte-parole de l'Association des musulmans du Canada. Ah, vous voulez entendre une autre personne? Oui, allez-y.
Sorry. So until this point, like no one can go to the border if their name is not on the border. So we have been trying, as everyone here and everyone across the country who has family in Gaza, contacting the SOS, because they are the one who put the names on the evacuation list. And we all, as everyone, I can speak for everyone across the country, they all received the same answer, which is the only people who qualify to be on the evacuation list is a spouse of a Canadian citizen or a permanent resident, or children under 22 years old. I have my parents there. I've tried every way to contact them. Many people, everyone across the country have tried. We get the same template of email from the SOS.
If I could just to provide some context, through our offices, we've been contacted from Palestinian-Canadians from across the country. The impetus of this press conference, in fact, is led by the community who, in their own ways, had to organize hundreds of families to sign on for an initial letter. This is a letter, of course, that came through my office and then through the caucus, and we've also drafted another follow-up letter. The truth is, from the appearance on the outside, this Liberal government has no idea about the responsibilities that they have to Canadians and Canadian citizens trapped in Gaza. There seems to be no consular services. There seems to be no support at the borders. Just last week, or 2 weeks ago, we heard from members who had escaped and shared just how difficult it was, even when they got to the other side. All that these people are asking for is the same and equal consideration as Canadian citizens that are applied to all Canadian citizens trapped in these conflict zones.
Monsieur le porte-parole de l'Association des musulmans du Canada, bonjour. On nous annonce une grande manifestation pro-Israël aujourd'hui sur la colline du Parlement. Qu'en pensez-vous?
Aujourd'hui, on est ici pour appuyer la demande pour l'élargissement des critères pour les familles qui sont prises à Gaza. Fait que c'est vraiment ce que...
Moi, je vous pose une question sur le rassemblement pro-israélien.
Tout le monde a le droit de se rassembler sous la Constitution canadienne, puis en ce qui concerne plus que ça, j'ai pas de commentaire.
Thank you. Next question.
The families I've heard from have said this is fundamentally a question of fairness. They feel that people in Gaza are not being treated the same way as Canadians in other regions of the world. Do you think that's an accurate assessment in the NDP's view? And perhaps some folks would like to weigh in as well.
Well, what we do know is that if the Canadian government want to take action to help bring families to safety, they can. What we do know is that the Canadian government has demonstrated in the case of Ukraine the unprecedented measures that has been brought in and how the Canadian government mobilized those measures to bring people to safety who is faced with an unjust war that's taking place. So to that end, the Canadian government can do this. They can do this. It has been done before. And many people will tell you what the Canadian government has done in the case of Ukraine has set a standard. And that should actually be a standard that should apply in all instances. It should not be the exception. And we, the NDP, agree.
This one, I mean, we know that the government has treated Afghans differently in terms of bringing them back to Canada. What makes you think that they could possibly do anything differently in Gaza? I mean, this is dependent on the Israelis, it's dependent on Egypt, it's not, and we've seen that Canadians have the Canadian government has very little influence when it comes to this war.
Well, in terms of special immigration measures, it's entirely up to the Canadian government. The Canadian government can't make that decision right now. In fact, they could have made that decision yesterday. And so we're calling on the government to do exactly that. We've seen Australia. The Australian government has made that decision. They have brought in a special immigration measure to actually allow for Australians to bring family members to safety. And they have allowed for an expedited visa process for them. And so far, to my understanding, they've brought in about 800 people under that special immigration measure. So the Canadian government can do this. There's no justification for us to not do it. You know, I asked the government, we're all part of the human race. And right now, we're faced with a humanitarian crisis. That has to be at the forefront. And it is about saving lives. It's about reuniting loved ones here in Canada with their brothers, their sisters, their aunts, their uncles, their nephews, their nieces, their loved ones. And we can do it.
Do you see a parallel with the Syrian refugees from 2015, or is there a huge difference here that the government could not act the same way it did when it came into power 8 years ago?
The Canadian government undertook important immigration measures in the Syrian crisis. The Canadian government took extraordinary immigration measures in the case of Ukraine. The Canadian government, even to some extent, took special immigration measures for Afghanistan. Not enough, but they did. So in this instance, the Canadian government can take special immigration measures like the ones that we're asking for. They have the power within them. They just need to have the political will to take the action.
But in Gaza, it's the Israelis who control the list of who gets out, and it's the Egyptians who get the second say on that. So where does Canada fit in? How does Canada influence that process?
Well, I would just say this. If Australia can do it, so can we.
How?
Well, first, the government has to make and announce that there is a special immigration measure, that we will ensure loved ones with extended families would be able to come to Canada. The government can deploy a variety of different things. For example, issue a temporary residence permit, for example, and that has often been done in cases similar to this, where people are desperate and need to come to safety. People who, for example, in the past were being persecuted need to come to safety. So the Canadian government have those measures to undertake that. The minister himself has said that he will be as flexible as possible to bring extended family members here. We're aware that they have brought some there. Well, if they can do it in that instance, they can apply a policy that is fair, that is just, and announce it publicly and work in bringing people to safety.
Can I ask, was the NDP invited to the rally this afternoon by the Center for Israel and Jewish Affairs, or I just noticed there's nobody from the NDP going on the list? Do you know what happened there?
I wasn't, certainly.
Sorry, I haven't checked all of my emails. I can't say. Yeah, sorry.
I think it's important that in today's press conference, given the testimonies that we've heard, that the focus remains on the Palestinian communities and those trying to reconnect with their families. We certainly, in every instance, denounce anti-Semitism in all of its forms, anywhere that it's present. But today is about ensuring that those that are trapped in Gaza, that is currently under siege, receive the same kind of respect and treatment as Canadian citizens as every other Canadian in this country.
Your temporary immigration measures, how do you envision that working? A temporary visa? I mean, I think the concern is that people are going to come here and not have anything to go back to, potentially, given the scale of the destruction in the Gaza Strip.
Right. On the question around the special immigration measure, what we're calling for is family reunification, to bring loved ones here temporarily, and for some who may want to stay permanently. So in that instance, the Canadian law allows for people to return if they wish to. And so they're not coming as refugees. In that instance, they're coming as the measure under special family reunification immigration measures. So if at a later date people wish to return, that will be entirely up to them to make that decision. It will not be up to the politicians to make that decision.
Thank you. Thank you so much. Thank you.
Okay.
We're going to head back downstairs.